The first thing they saw was light, brighter than the heart of a dying star, stretching across the void like a blade of judgment. It wasn't the glow of a supernova, nor the flare of some natural anomaly. This was crafted light, disciplined, and exact, forged inside the colossal cannons of the Thundersoul battleship. Those who challenged humanity thought they were about to face just another fragile world-bound species, armed with primitive fleets and fragile pride. They never expected the sky itself to answer with such fury. And in that instant, every alien, commander watching realized they had made a mistake too great to undo. Humanity had always been underestimated. For centuries, they were dismissed as latecomers to the galactic stage, reckless upstarts who stumbled into faster-than-light travel long after other civilizations had mastered it. Their planets were scarred with wars, their history marked with mistakes. Yet hidden within that turbulent past was something no one else could match: the stubborn will to endure. Empires older than Earth's first written word looked at them and saw only weakness. But weakness has a way of becoming strength when tempered by fire. And by the time the alien coalition finally turned its gaze upon human space, humanity had already begun building something the galaxy had never seen before. The Thundersoul was more than a battleship. It was the embodiment of every lesson learned, from centuries of survival. Its armor was layered with metals mined from neutron star debris, impossible alloys that could shrug off the concentrated fire of fleets. Its engines sang with the controlled storms of captured quasars, giving it speed and power far beyond anything expected of primitive humans. And its weapons. Its weapons were the kind that turned admirals into believers in old myths. Whole fleets had been designed in secret to support it. But the Thundersoul stood as the crown jewel, humanity's warning to anyone foolish enough to test them. The first confrontation was not planned by humans. It was forced upon them. The alien coalition had grown greedy, convinced humanity's expansion into the outer colonies was a threat to their trade routes. They saw rich mineral worlds, lush habitats, and a young race spreading faster than seemed possible. Fear is often disguised as arrogance, and so they masked their unease with ultimatums. When humanity refused to bow, the coalition launched a warning strike against an outlying colony. What they didn't know was that the Thundersoul was already waiting, silent, in the dark. The crew of the Thundersoul were not the kind of people sung about in ancient poems. They weren't chosen for glory, but for resilience. Engineers who had grown up in collapsing cities, pilots who had dodged orbital debris in crowded skies, officers who had once commanded nothing more than freighters, but had learned to make miracles with broken equipment. They were not warriors in the old sense. They were survivors who had been shaped by struggle. And now they sat strapped to the most powerful ship ever built, staring into the abyss where an enemy fleet began to emerge. The enemy ships came in lines of cold precision, their hulls glowing with alien symbols that promised superiority. They carried weapons honed by thousands of years of interstellar war, and their commanders radiated the calm arrogance of species that had never lost to a younger race. They believed they were about to swat an insect. They believed the stories told across the stars, that humans were fragile, emotional, and unprepared for the realities of war on a galactic scale. Their mistake was believing history would repeat itself. What they didn't understand was that humans never fought fair. They fought to survive. The bridge of the Thundersoul was silent as the coalition transmitted its final demand: surrender or be erased. There was no panic among the crew, only the steady hum of systems preparing for battle. In the center of the command deck, the captain gave no speech of defiance, no desperate plea. Instead, with a voice steady as the void itself, they gave a single order: ignite the core. Deep within the Thundersoul, reactors stirred awake like slumbering beasts. Energy surged through conduits, lighting the vessel from within. Panels rattled as the ship began to resonate with power, its hull glowing faintly with arcs of blue. Lightning. The crew tightened their grips on controls, each one knowing the weight of the moment. For them, this was not just about a battle. It was about proving humanity's place among the stars. It was about showing that the centuries of mockery, the whispers of weakness, and the dismissive glances would all end here. In one decisive strike, the alien fleet moved into position, confident in their overwhelming numbers. Dozens of ships locked targeting arrays onto the Thunder Soul, preparing to fire. But in their arrogance, they did not recognize the shift in the void itself, the subtle bend of space around the human battleship, the gathering storm that made their instruments flicker with errors. They did not notice until it was far too late. The first strike was not a beam, nor a missile, nor any weapon the galaxy had seen before. It was a thunderclap of pure energy, a pulse that erupted like the anger of 1,000 storms, tearing through the silence of space. In one instant, half the enemy fleet was crippled, shields shattered, hulls torn apart, systems fried into silence. The surviving ships reeled back in horror, their sensors overloaded by the impossible force that had struck them. What they had thought was a single ship revealed itself as something more. A storm wrapped in steel, a weapon born not of arrogance but of desperation and survival. Across the alien command channels, panic broke the calm. Orders turned to cries, strategy to chaos. They had crossed a line they could never retreat from, and they knew it. The humans had shown their hand, and it was not the trembling weakness the coalition expected. It was power, raw, unrelenting, and merciless. Yet even as the first wave of destruction echoed through the void, the Thunder Soul was not finished. Its cannons rotated with a predator's patience, locking on to the scattered survivors. The storm within its core surged higher, hungry for release. On the bridge, the crew sat in silence, faces lit by the glow of their instruments. No cheers, no shouts of victory, only the quiet certainty of those who had endured too much to waste energy on triumph. For them, this was only the beginning. The coalition fleet tried to regroup, desperate to believe they still held the advantage. They had numbers, centuries of experience, and ships that had conquered countless enemies. But all of it suddenly felt fragile. They had awakened something far worse than a rival empire. They had awakened a species that had been underestimated one time too many. And as the Thunder Soul prepared its next strike, the galaxy itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see if humanity would stop, or if this was only the first step, in a storm that would sweep across the stars. And then, in the silence that followed the thunder, a new signal appeared on the sensors. It was not from the enemy fleet. It was not from any human colony. It was something else, something deeper in the void, listening, watching, and perhaps waiting for humanity's storm to grow stronger. The silence after the first strike was heavy, almost suffocating. The void itself seemed to recoil from the unleashed power of the Thunder Soul. And yet, on the bridge, the crew remained motionless, their eyes fixed on the drifting wreckage of what had once been a proud coalition fleet. Sparks of broken ships scattered across the stars, and fragments of metal spun like dead embers from a fire already gone cold. But behind that destruction was no relief. No one breathed easy, because they knew this was only the beginning. Humanity had fired its warning shot, and the galaxy would not ignore it. The alien coalition had been arrogant, but arrogance had its roots in history. For thousands of years, they had crushed younger species, bending them into vassals or erasing them from memory. They believed time itself was on their side, that endurance belonged only to the ancient. They had called humans reckless builders of fire, claiming Earth's people rushed too quickly, never pausing to understand the deeper wisdom of the stars. But what they never realized was that the very chaos of humanity's history had forged something stronger than wisdom. It had forged defiance, That defiance now lived within the Thunder Soul, and with every flicker of its stormlit core, the galaxy's balance began to tilt. Inside the ship, the crew felt the weight of what they had done pressing down on them. For all their training and preparation, none of them could shake the thought that they had just stepped across a threshold from which there was no return. They were not explorers anymore. They were not colonists defending distant worlds. They were the sharp edge of a blade that would either carve out humanity's future or break against the pressure of countless enemies waiting in the dark. The captain's voice came steady across the bridge, reminding everyone to hold focus. The strike was a beginning, not an end. Eyes forward. The void hasn't finished testing us yet. And it was true. Because even as the coalition survivors struggled to regroup, something else lingered beyond the battlefield. The strange signal detected after the strike pulsed faintly through the void. It was older than the coalition. Older, even than the human sensors that had barely managed to register it. A rhythmic whisper buried beneath static, repeating like a call from some distant, forgotten presence. No translation could decode it fully, but every technician who listened felt the same unease. It was not random noise. It was deliberate. Someone, or something, was listening to the storm humanity had just unleashed. The crew carried on, but the signal's presence gnawed at the edges of their thoughts. Some wondered if it was another fleet, waiting to strike once both sides were weakened. Others believed it was a remnant of some ancient race, a watcher that had seen empires rise and fall long before Earth's people learned to build fires in caves. The possibility that humanity's first true display of power had not only defeated the coalition, but awakened a greater force kept the tension sharp. But no one dared voice the thought aloud. For now, they had to focus on survival. The mystery could wait if they lived long enough to solve it. As the Thunder Soul drifted closer to human space, the wider context began to settle in. This wasn't just a battle for one colony or one border system. Humanity's survival depended on what came next. Word of the strike would travel faster than any fleet. Alien rulers who once mocked Earth as a child among giants would soon hear of the storm that shattered an armada in seconds. Some would retreat in fear, but others would not hesitate. They would gather their allies, sharpen their blades, and prepare to strike harder than before. Humanity's defiance had bought them respect, but it had also painted a target larger than ever. The crew's backgrounds reflected why humanity could never be underestimated. The gunnery officer had grown up scavenging weapons from old battlefields on a world torn apart by endless civil wars. The chief engineer had survived orbital debris storms in Earth's early space age, patching holes in stations with little more than stubbornness and scrap metal. The navigator was once a miner, guiding convoys through asteroid fields where one mistake meant instant death. None of them had been born warriors, but all of them had been shaped by survival. That was the heart of humanity's strength. It wasn't discipline or tradition that carried them forward. It was the raw will to adapt when every other choice had been taken away. The coalition didn't understand that. They thought in terms of order, hierarchy, and controlled growth. They saw humanity's chaotic expansion into the stars as reckless, even dangerous. But to humans, chaos was life. From the very first city-states on Earth to the countless colonies, scattered across the spiral arms, they had always thrived in uncertainty. That was why the Thunder Soul existed at all. It wasn't a project born of luxury or tradition. It was built in secrecy, under threat, in fear of what the galaxy might one day bring. And when the day came, the ship rose like a storm breaking. Over silent seas. Now, as the coalition survivors limped back into the void, humanity's leaders debated in hushed voices. Some wanted to use the strike as proof of strength, demanding recognition and alliances. Others feared escalation, believing humanity was not ready for the wars that might follow. And in the shadows, there were whispers of factions who believed the Thunder Soul itself was too dangerous, that no species should hold such power. But those debates would have to wait. Because the signal was still out there, whispering faintly, as if inviting humanity to take its next step, or warning them not to dot on the Thunder Soul, the crew prepared for the possibility of another engagement. Scans showed faint distortions at the edge of the system, where the signal seemed strongest. Was it the Coalition sending reinforcements or something else entirely? Every officer knew the risk. If they pushed forward, they might uncover the truth. If they withdrew, they might survive for now, but they would never know what had stirred in the dark. And deep down, humanity had never been a species to turn away from the unknown. That same restless curiosity that had carried them across oceans and into the stars now burned in every heart aboard the Battleship. The alien coalition, reeling from their loss, sent frantic transmissions to their central command. They spoke of impossible weapons, of storms contained in steel, of humans wielding power far beyond their supposed age. Their words were tinged with disbelief, but also with fear. Some commanders demanded immediate retaliation. Others counseled retreat, claiming it was better to wait until more was understood. But the damage was done. The Thunder Soul had shattered not only ships, but the illusion of control that the Coalition had held for centuries. For the first time in living memory, the galaxy was uncertain. And uncertainty was where humanity thrived best. In the quiet between battles, the crew allowed themselves brief moments of reflection. They spoke in low voices about Earth, about the colonies, about the people waiting for them back home. For all their training, they were still human, still capable of doubt, fear, and longing. Yet beneath it all ran a current of determination. They weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting to prove that humanity belonged here, in the vast cold of the galaxy, where every star was both a promise and a threat. And in the heart of the Thunder Soul, the storm still waited, coiled and ready, demanding to be unleashed. Again, the mysterious signal pulsed once more, stronger this time, echoing through the hull as if it were not merely a transmission, but a heartbeat. The crew froze, their instruments lighting up with strange readings. Whatever was out there was closer now, drawn by the chaos they had created. No one spoke. No one moved. The void itself seemed to lean in, waiting for the next sound. And in that silence, humanity stood at the edge of revelation, or destruction. The Thunder Soul was ready. But was humanity? The answer lay in the darkness ahead. The pulse of the strange signal reverberated through the Thunder Soul's hull like the echo of some hidden heartbeat. Every crew member felt it, though none could explain it. The technicians tried to mask their unease with data streams and scans, but the results made no sense. The signal wasn't being broadcast from a ship, at least not one built in any way the crew understood. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, woven into the very fabric of the void, as though space itself was alive and listening. Some whispered that the storm unleashed by humanity had awakened something buried deep in the silence between stars, something older than the Coalition or even humanity's imagination. The captain didn't allow speculation to cloud the mission. Orders were clear: continue to monitor the signal and prepare for another wave of enemies. The Coalition might have been shattered in the first strike, but they would return. That was their nature. Still, beneath the discipline of command, the captain wondered if they had just stumbled onto a battlefield larger than they could comprehend. Back on Earth, the news of the Thunder Soul's victory spread like wildfire. For the first time, ordinary people across the colonies felt a sense of pride that eclipsed their fear. Stories painted the Thunder Soul as a legend already, a ship that had turned the galaxy's most feared coalition into scattered wreckage. But where pride grew, so did division. Politicians saw opportunity in the weapon's power, while others feared humanity would become the very monster they claimed to resist. On some colonies, citizens demanded more Thunder Soul-class ships be built, while others marched in protest, warning that the galaxy would unite to crush them if they flaunted such power. Humanity had survived its first trial, but the real war of ideas was only beginning. Meanwhile, the coalition was far from defeated. Their surviving commanders limped back to the core systems, carrying fragmented reports of the impossible strike. Their leaders gathered in secret halls of crystal and light, debating whether humanity's weapon was a singular anomaly or the first of many. Some demanded a united assault to wipe humans out before they gained strength. Others, shaken by the sheer scale of the Thunder Soul's power, hesitated, suggesting diplomacy, or at least caution. For the first time in centuries, they argued with real fear in their voices, and in that fear, cracks began to spread through their unity. On the Thunder Soul itself, smaller conflicts brewed within the crew. The gunnery officer, still haunted by the sight of ships burning in silence, argued that they had gone too far. "We didn't just defend ourselves," they said in a hushed tone to their fellow officers. "We destroyed them before they even had the chance to retreat. What happens when that's us on the other side of a storm?" The engineer countered sharply, insisting survival left no room for hesitation. "If we hesitate, we die. If we show mercy, they'll come back twice as strong. That's the truth of space. You either strike hard, or you're erased." Their words hung heavy, not answered, not forgotten. The signal pulsed again, stronger than before. This time the data was clearer. Patterns began to emerge, mathematical, deliberate, almost like a language. The linguists aboard worked tirelessly, trying to decode it. What unsettled them was not just that the signal was intelligent, but that it seemed to be reacting to the Thunder Soul itself. Each time the ship's core shifted in power, the signal responded, as though curious, as though watching. Some even believed it was testing them, like an unseen judge observing from the darkness. Then the system snapped back, and the coalition's fleets lit up the sensors once more. Two threats now bore down on humanity: the wrath of an ancient, unknown storm and the vengeance of a galaxy united in fear. The Thunder Soul stood at the center, one ship against everything, its core glowing brighter, hungrier, alive with power. The crew felt it in their bones. The climax was coming. The coalition was days away. The storm in the void was seconds from breaking. And the Thunder Soul could not stand still. They would have to choose: face the fleets, face the storm, or unleash a power that might consume them all. The captain looked out into the distortion one last time, the storm reflected in their eyes. They wanted to test humanity, they whispered, almost to themselves. "Then let them see." The crew braced. The void shook. The storm roared, and the Thunder Soul prepared to strike again. The storm outside the Thunder Soul writhed like a living thing, arcs of energy flashing across the void as if lightning itself had taken form in the darkness. The crew stood frozen at their stations, the air on the bridge so tense it felt like a held breath. They had prepared for the coalition's fleets. They had braced for vengeance, but no one had expected this. A force greater than ships and weapons loomed in the black, and the storm inside their own core pulsed in answer, like a heartbeat syncing with something vast and ancient. For the first time, the crew wondered if their ship was no longer just a creation of humanity's hands, but part of something older. The captain gave no outward sign of fear, but deep in their eyes there was a flicker of unease. They had commanded many battles, but never had the void itself seemed to turn against them. The distortion stretched wider, bending the stars until whole constellations disappeared behind shifting waves of light. And then, through the shimmer, shapes began to emerge. They weren't ships, not in the sense anyone understood. They were colossal, jagged silhouettes, woven from storm and shadow, each one moving with the slow grace of something that had never known fear. Their presence wasn't random. It was deliberate. They were watching the thunder dash. Soul. Whispers ran through the crew. Some thought these beings were the source of the signal. Others believed they were the remnants of the forgotten civilizations hinted at in coalition myths. The linguists, pale and trembling, decoded fragments of the pulse that now throbbed through every system. The words were incomplete, half-formed, but their meaning chilled the blood of everyone who heard them. The message was not a greeting, it was a judgment. And the Thunder Soul had been marked as both challenger and target. Before the crew could process this revelation, a new report cut through the chaos. Coalition fleets were burning toward them faster than expected, entire armadas pushing past, their own limits to converge on the system. The timing was no coincidence. Someone among the coalition had known. Perhaps their myths were not just stories. Perhaps they had feared this storm all along. And now, they weren't just coming for humanity. They were coming to stop what the Thunder Soul had awakened. The stakes had shifted. Humanity was no longer fighting only for survival against the coalition. They were caught between two storms, one of vengeance and one of judgment. If they faltered against either, they would be erased from the stars. In the lower decks, engineers scrambled to stabilize the storm core. Its energy readings were rising beyond anything recorded, surging in rhythm with the distortions outside. Panels glowed with unnatural heat, and arcs of power snapped across conduits like claws tearing at the ship. The chief engineer barked orders, sweat pouring as they forced the systems into balance. But in their eyes, there was fear. The Thunder Soul wasn't just reacting, it was resonating, like it was answering a call. "It's feeding on them," the engineer muttered under their breath, staring at the readings. "Or they're feeding on us. I don't know which." On the bridge, the gunnery officer studied the strange storm forms with clenched fists. "If they attack, we won't stand a chance," they said flatly. "Coalition fleets behind us, this ahead. We'll be crushed between them." The navigator shook their head. "Maybe they aren't enemies in the way we think. Maybe this is a test. The myths, the warnings. What if they're measuring us, deciding if we're worth letting survive?" The words brought no comfort. Humanity had never asked to be tested. The coalition transmissions intercepted that same hour deepened the unease. Some enemy commanders weren't merely preparing for battle, they were terrified. The ancient warnings that had once been dismissed now spread through their ranks, sowing panic. "The storm judges," one fragment translated, "the ones who come when power is misused. We thought they were gone." Others ignored the fear and demanded war. But the fact that even their enemies trembled made the crew of the Thunder Soul understand the scale of what they had awoken. And then came the second twist. From the distortion ahead, one of the vast storm forms shifted, its shape rippling with arcs of lightning. Without warning, a surge of energy shot across the void and struck the Thunder Soul. The ship convulsed, alarms screaming, crew thrown from their stations. Lights flickered, systems died and reignited, and for a heartbeat the storm core itself went dark. But when it flared back to life, the ship was not the same. Every console lit with new symbols, patterns no human had programmed. Systems once familiar now displayed data in languages no one recognized. The Thunder Soul had been touched, changed, as if rewritten by something far beyond human design. The crew scrambled to regain control. The captain demanded reports, but every officer could only shake their head. The ship was still theirs, still under command, but it was different. Stronger, faster, hungrier. The storm inside its heart now pulsed with the rhythm of the storm outside, and its weapons charged without a single order given. It was as if the Thunder Soul itself had taken a side. But whose side? Humanity's, or the beings in the distortion? Fear turned into suspicion among the crew. The gunnery officer accused the captain of knowing this was possible, of hiding the truth of the core's origins. The navigator argued back, saying no one could have known, that the ship was revealing secrets even to its builders. The tension between them snapped like stretched wire, their arguments echoing through the bridge until the captain silenced them with a single command. Focus. Whatever this ship is becoming, we will control it. Not the storm, not the coalition. Us. But in the silence that followed, everyone wondered if control was already slipping from their hands. The coalition fleets closed in, their formation tightening like a noose. The strange beings in the distortion held their ground, silent, watching, as if waiting to see what humanity would do. The Thundersoul's core pulsed brighter, each wave of power stronger than the last, begging to be unleashed. The choice was clear, but it was a trap either way. If they unleashed the storm against the coalition, they might win, but at the cost of drawing the judgment of the beings ahead. If they held back, the coalition would overwhelm them, and humanity would burn. The crew's fear turned into something darker. Doubt. The communications officer whispered the question no one wanted to voice. What if this was the point? What if they pushed us here on purpose? The coalition's arrogance, the strike, the signal. What if all of it was meant to bring us to this place? To see if we would destroy ourselves? The idea spread through the crew like wildfire. Were they fighting enemies or playing a role in someone else's design? The distortion pulsed again, and for the first time, a clear message broke through. It wasn't in words, but in feeling. An overwhelming surge that filled every mind aboard. The meaning was simple. Choose. The Thunder Soul hung in the void between two storms, the galaxy closing in from behind, the judgment of something incomprehensible ahead. Humanity's survival, its future, its place among the stars balanced on the edge of one decision. And as the crew stared into the shifting dark, hearts pounding, the storm core roared louder, like it already knew what choice was coming. The void shuddered. The coalition drew closer, and the strange storm forms leaned forward, waiting. The climax was inevitable now. One strike could save them or doom everything. And in that unbearable tension, the Thunder Soul glowed like a star preparing to explode. The void was no longer silent. It throbbed with the pulse of two storms, one made of steel and vengeance, the other born of something older and beyond comprehension. The Thunder Soul hung at the center of it all, its storm core blazing brighter than ever, casting arcs of lightning that danced across the ship's hull like chains barely holding it together. The coalition's fleets drew closer, an overwhelming armada blotting out the stars behind them, while the colossal storm forms loomed ahead, waiting. The crew felt as if they were standing on the edge of creation itself, knowing the next choice would decide not just humanity's fate, but perhaps the fate of the galaxy. The captain's hands rested steady on the command console, though their heart pounded like a drum. Reports streamed in, coalition ships arming planetary-scale weapons, their formations spreading wide to surround the Thunder Soul. There was no way out. Behind the bridge crew's discipline, fear gnawed at every soul. They were survivors, yes, but even survival has its limits. Yet the storm core inside their ship hummed louder, hungrier, almost eager to be unleashed again. It was as if the Thunder Soul itself had made its choice. The gunnery officer broke the silence, voice low but firm. Captain, if we fire the core again, at full release, we'll tear their fleets apart, all of them. But we might not survive. It. The engineer cut in immediately, their voice sharp with warning. Not might. Won't. The ship wasn't built to hold that much energy. One more strike like the first, maybe, but a full release, it'll consume us. The words hung, heavy in the air. Use the storm, and they'd save humanity at the cost of their lives. Refuse it, and the coalition would erase them before the ancient storm even had its say. The captain's gaze shifted to the distortion ahead. The storm forms loomed, massive arcs of lightning shaping silhouettes too vast to measure. And then, for the first time, One of them moved closer. The signal roared through the Thunder Soul's systems, clear and undeniable. The words were simple. Show us. It was a demand, a test, a judgment. The beings of Storm weren't enemies in the traditional sense. They were waiting for humanity to prove itself, to reveal what kind of species they would be. Would they destroy without hesitation, or would they resist the temptation of overwhelming power? Humanity's place among the stars balanced on that blade. The Coalition's fleets opened fire. Streams of plasma and antimatter lit the void, thousands of weapons streaking toward the Thunder Soul. Shields flared, hull plates shook, alarms screamed. The first salvos ripped across their defenses, and the ship groaned under the onslaught. The crew clung to their stations, teeth gritted, eyes fixed on the captain. The choice had to be made now. The captain's voice finally rang out steady as thunder. We don't fire to destroy. We fire to survive. The order snapped across the bridge. Target their command vessels. Break their lines. No more. The Storm Corps roared to life, its energy surging into the Thunder Soul's weapons. A beam of pure lightning ripped across the void, blinding in its brilliance. It tore through the Coalition's lead dreadnought, splitting it in half like paper. The blast continued, cutting through ship after ship, shattering the fleet's perfect formation. But it was not a full release. The captain had held back, channeling the storm into precision rather than destruction. The Coalition reeled there, commanders shouting fractured orders. Some ships broke formation, retreating in panic. Others pressed forward, desperate to overwhelm the Thunder Soul before it struck again. The void became a sea of fire and debris as the human battleship carved through the chaos with surgical fury. Yet even as enemy after enemy fell, the crew knew the Storm Corps was nearing its limit. The ship's systems strained, sparks flying from panels, heat rising through the decks. The Thunder Soul could not hold much longer. And then, the second storm struck. The storm forms ahead unleashed their power, arcs of energy flashing through the void with terrifying speed. But they did not strike the Thunder Soul. They struck the Coalition. Whole fleets were engulfed in storms of light, their weapons turned to ash, their engines silenced in an instant. The Coalition's proud armada, built on arrogance and centuries of dominance, was torn apart in moments by beings beyond comprehension. Those who had sworn to wipe humanity from the stars were reduced to drifting wreckage, their screams swallowed by the storm. On the Thunder Soul's bridge, silence fell. The crew stared in shock as the Coalition burned, not by their hands, but by the judgment of something greater. The storm forms had chosen. Humanity had shown restraint, and in that restraint, they had been spared. The message echoed through the ship, filling every mind aboard with a voice like rolling thunder. You endure. You belong. Relief washed through the crew, though it was laced with awe and terror. The Coalition was broken. Humanity had survived. But as the distortion began to fade, as the storm forms withdrew into the void, something unexpected happened. The Storm Corps inside the Thunder Soul surged one last time, brighter than ever before, and for a moment the crew felt a presence moving through their ship. It wasn't hostile, but it wasn't human either. It was the storm itself, marking them, binding them, leaving something behind. And then it was gone. The captain staggered, gripping the console, their voice rough but steady. Status. The engineer, pale and shaking, replied, The core. It's stable again, but it's not the same. It's changed. It's like it's alive. No one spoke after that. They all felt it too. The Thunder Soul was no longer just a weapon. It was something more. Something touched by forces older than stars. Across the galaxy. The destruction of the Coalition armada sent shockwaves. Civilizations that once dismissed humanity as reckless upstarts now saw them in a new light. The Thunder Soul had not only survived, It had stood between two storms and proven itself. Some would fear them. Some would respect them. All would remember the name Thunder-Soul. But the final twist came in the quiet that followed the distortion. Was gone, the storm forms vanished, but the strange signal had not ended. It pulsed faintly through the Thunder-Soul systems, softer now, but clear. And when the linguists translated it, their faces went pale. It was not just a farewell. It was a warning. Others will come. The bridge fell silent. The crew exchanged uneasy glances. If there were others, other beings like the stormforms or worse, then humanity's trial had only begun. The coalition had been a test of survival. The storm had been a test of restraint. But something far larger waited beyond the stars. Watching, waiting to see what humanity would do next. The captain looked out into the dark, the wreckage of fleets scattered across the void, and spoke the words that echoed through the ship. Then we'll be ready. The Thunder-Soul turned its prow toward the stars, its storm core glowing with new light, carrying not just the power of humanity, but the mark of something far greater. The galaxy would never be the same again. Humanity had survived its first judgment, but the storm was only beginning. The battlefield was quiet now, but it was not the silence of peace. Wreckage drifted where the coalition's mighty fleets had once stood, broken hulls spinning slowly, their lights flickering into nothing. The Thunder-Soul moved through the debris like a survivor picking its way through the ruins of a storm. Every eye on the bridge lingered on the shattered remains outside, and though victory was theirs, no one celebrated. The weight of what had happened pressed down heavier than any defeat could have. They had survived the coalition, they had been judged by beings beyond comprehension, and they had been changed. The storm had marked them forever. The crew worked, quietly to restore stability. Systems flickered back online, battered but holding. The engineer confirmed that the storm core was no longer in danger of tearing itself apart, but their voice carried no comfort. "It's not the same core," they admitted. "It's alive now. It responds before I even touch the controls, as if it's waiting for us or guiding us." A shiver moved through the crew at those words. Their ship was no longer just a creation of human hands. It had become something more, something that carried the storm itself inside it. News of the battle spread quickly. Human colonies received word of the victory with awe and disbelief. Families who had feared annihilation now looked to the stars with pride, speaking the name Thunder-Soul like it was a promise. On Earth, leaders struggled to process the reality of what had happened. The coalition, once thought unbreakable, had been torn apart. Humanity had been spared when no other young species ever had, and yet the signal that lingered in the Thunder-Soul systems could not be ignored. "Others will come." Those words echoed in every council, every chamber of power, a warning that this was not the end, but the beginning. The political debates grew fierce. Some argued that humanity must build more ships like the Thunder-Soul to prepare for whatever was coming. Others warned that even trying would be folly. The core that powered the ship was unique, touched by forces that could not be replicated. To build more would not only fail, it might invite disaster. Meanwhile, there were whispers of mistrust. Could the crew be trusted after what had happened? Were they still fully human, or had the storm changed them too? These doubts threatened to fracture humanity at the very moment unity was most needed. On the Thunder-Soul, the crew faced their own questions. The gunnery officer admitted in private that they had wanted to unleash the full fury of the storm against the coalition. They confessed the relief they felt when the captain held back, proving that humanity could survive without becoming monsters. The navigator, who had feared the signal all along, admitted a quiet awe for the beings that had appeared. "They didn't destroy us. They gave us a chance," they said. "That means something. We were measured, and we weren't found wanting." The engineer, still uneasy, worried that the Storm Corps had its own will. "If it ever decides we are unworthy," they whispered, "we may not have a choice in what happens next." The captain carried all of these voices within them. They knew the choices they had made would echo across history. They had chosen restraint over destruction, survival over pride. And in that choice, humanity had been spared. But the warning left by the storm forms was clear. This was only one trial, one step. Somewhere beyond the stars, others were waiting. If humanity was to endure, it could not rely on a single ship or a single storm. It would have to become something greater, united, resilient, unafraid. The coalition's defeat shattered their unity. Reports trickled in of species turning on one another, blaming each other for the disaster. Some sought to regroup, but their fleets were broken and their pride wounded. Others withdrew entirely, their leaders too shaken by the storm's judgment to risk further war. The galaxy that once saw humanity as a minor nuisance now looked upon them with fear, suspicion, and, in some corners, respect. The old order had been broken. A new one was taking shape, and humanity stood at its heart. But victory brought no comfort to those who had fought it. In the quiet of the crew quarters, many wrestled with what they had seen. Some dreamed still, of storms sweeping across entire galaxies, of voices whispering in ancient tongues. Others tried to write letters home, struggling to find words that could make sense of what had happened. The bonds between them grew deeper, forged in fire and silence, but each of them knew they were no longer the same people who had set out on this mission. The Thunder Soul had changed them, and not only in the eyes of others. The final journey back toward human space was long, and every step felt uncertain. The signal continued to hum faintly through the ship, like a reminder that their story was unfinished. Sometimes it grew stronger, pulsing in rhythm with the Storm Corps, as though reminding them that eyes still watched from beyond. Other times, it faded almost completely, like a distant heartbeat, just far enough away to let them breathe. But it never disappeared. It was proof that humanity had entered into something far larger than the wars of empires. When the Thunder Soul finally returned to orbit above a human colony, people lined the skies to watch. Children pointed as the massive ship descended, its hull scarred but intact, glowing faintly with the energy that had spared them all. To them, it was more than a battleship. It was a symbol of survival, a promise that humanity could endure whatever the galaxy threw at them. For the crew, stepping off the ship onto solid ground felt surreal. They had been through fire and storm, and now they were greeted with cheers and relief. But beneath the celebration, they knew the truth. This was not the end. The captain addressed the people simply, without grand speeches. "We were tested," they said. "We survived. But others will come. We must be ready." The words spread quickly, carried across the colonies, etched into memory. They were not words of fear, but of resolve. Humanity had always faced storms, from the days of fragile wooden ships on ancient seas to the vast battles of space, and every time they had endured. This would be no different. The Thunder Soul was taken into orbit for repairs, but its storm core could not be touched. Engineers tried to analyze it, but the readings defied explanation. Some believed it was no longer a machine at all, but a living fragment of the storm that had spared them. Others whispered that it was a gift, a tool meant to prepare humanity for what was still to come. Whatever the truth, it was a reminder that the galaxy had changed. Humanity was no longer a quiet newcomer. They were part of something greater now, marked by forces older than stars. As the crew dispersed, returning to their families or preparing for the missions ahead, they carried with them the weight of their journey. They had seen the face of annihilation and chosen a path that spared not only themselves, but their entire species. Yet they had also glimpsed the shadow of what lay beyond, A future where humanity would be tested again, not by arrogant empires, but by something vast and relentless. The Yai. Final night aboard, the captain stood alone on the bridge, watching the stars. The wreckage of the coalition was far behind them, the storm forms gone, but the memory of that judgment still lingered. They thought of the warning, of the others that would come. The captain did not fear it. Humanity had been underestimated. Before, dismissed, mocked, and threatened. Yet time and again, they had risen, not through sheer strength, but through resilience, defiance, and unity. That was their true weapon. The Thunder Soul's core pulsed softly in the dark, as though agreeing. The captain smiled faintly, placing a hand on the console. "Let them come," they whispered. "We'll be ready." The stars stretched out endless before them, full of danger, full of promise. Humanity had survived its first judgment. The galaxy would never see them the same way again. And somewhere, far beyond the reach of even the strongest sensors, the storm still watched, waiting for the day it would return. For now, though, humanity stood unbroken. The storm had passed, but the soul endured. The Thunder Soul was not just a battleship anymore. It was a message carved into the void itself. And that message was clear. Humanity belongs among the stars.